Vice President, India and Southeast Asia and APJ carrier, Akamai Technologies. And the session chair of this panel discussion is going to be Rameesh, Kailasam, CEO and President, IndiaTech Org. Thank you so much to all our eminent panelists for joining us. And with this, I'd now request Rameesh to take forth with his panel. Thank you for being our session chair. And I pass on the live baton to you now.
Thank you, Bhavna. Good evening to all of you. It's a great session that we are going to discuss and debate today on. And interestingly, it is titled The Pearls and Perils of Fantasy Sports. And if you look at it, we do have both those components actually being part of what's being debated in the market today. So today we intend to cover actually the varying aspects of online fantasy sports, which has actually emerged as one of the most significant subsector of the online gaming world today. I mean, the kind of valuations that you're seeing, you have companies ranging between more than $3 to $4 to $5 billion in valuation. So that's a kind of proof point that online fantasy sports is big and rivals all the big names in the startup ecosystem, which I represent as well, coincidentally. So today's session, if we look at it, we are going to actually discuss the pluses and the minuses. And of course, I would look forward to the panelists to be as open-ended as possible and speak out from your hearts. To give some context, actually, if you look at it, online fantasy sports actually sets itself aside from all other kinds of online gaming for the simple reason that this is one type of online gaming which is actually dependent on real life sports and players actually playing it out. So if real life sports doesn't happen, online fantasy sports doesn't exist. It's as simple and straightforward as that. Unlike the other online gaming where you and I could be playing a game of carom or chess or rummy and so on and so forth. So what is essential, therefore, which I think it is important for all the viewers and listeners here today to understand is no fantasy sports can happen if real life sporting events do not happen. It is dependent on a real life event actually taking place. Online fantasy sports has actually traveled quite a bit of regulatory journey in India because strangely, for some reason, unless you are challenged in a court, you are not legit because there are no regulations which exist formally in any written form for this sector. Even so for online gaming, but more so for online fantasy sports. So therefore, understanding the importance, I mean, you do have certain court rulings which are there. I mean, I recollect at least 3 court rulings in state levels, and of course, a couple of rulings at the central level, including the Supreme Court, including one that came in today, which clearly demarcate online fantasy sports played in certain formats as game of skill and takes them away from the ambit of online gambling and betting if certain formats are complied to, which was the one that was subjected by the courts and was proven that these were games of skill. So skill predominance and skill dependent is what drives this. Interestingly, I mean, we had also as IndiaTech.org, a body representing Indian startups and innovators in the ecosystem, plus of course the investors in this ecosystem. We had released a white paper in September of 2020 where we had actually covered all the aspects of online fantasy sports and come out with recommendations on what ideally the sector should look at and how should it behave and so on, which was actually discussed in detail in the Niti Aayog, which came out subsequently with the 8 guiding principles and the guidelines for potentially regulating the online fantasy sports sector, so that this is not looked at in a different fashion. So the online gaming market in India is projected to be around 155 billion and by 2023, and from 76 billion which existed in 2020. Often people come back to me and say online fantasy sports must have grown because people were in their homes. But I intend to actually, I mean, this is something we as an industry need to constantly coach people to tell them that, look, if real life games don't happen, we don't exist. And therefore, that's the key crux of it. Self-regulation, regulation are something that we are looking for. I would request the panelists to also add in a bit of your views on that. But through this session, with the set of esteemed panelists that we have today, we will try to decode and break down the contributions that this subsector of online gaming sector has been making to the Indian sporting ecosystem, and what lies ahead. Because livelihoods is emerging from this sector in a great way. You have online platforms, which are statistical platforms. You have sports content aggregators coming up. Sports merchandising is picking up. E-commerce is coming up through fantasy sports because you have fans trying to buy their merchandise and so on. Online sports streaming is another area which is developing. Digital payments, travel, sports experience, online coaching, sports kind of knowledge management, and cloud services, all of them are thriving because of online fantasy sports. And therefore, it's pretty critical that this sector grows and thrives. And also, there is enabling regulations in this regard. So let me quickly turn over to our guests. The first question is pointed to Madhur Singhal, who is the managing partner and CEO of Praxis Global Alliance. So Madhur, to kick off this session, starting with you, I would first begin and ask you, I mean, we are hearing a lot of staggering numbers on online fantasy sports industry, and it's been growing phenomenally. Despite the fact that we had lockdown, we still saw post the sports market kicking in, the surge continues on. So what has led to this sudden surge and uptake in the online fantasy sports in the last 3-4 years? And which is becoming one of the most preferred formats of online fantasy sports in the gaming space. So over to you, Madhur. And what do numbers look like, and how are they expected to grow? I mean, give us an industry perspective.
No, thank you, Ramesh, for the opportunity. I think you're absolutely right. I think that this market has obviously grown quite rapidly over the last 4 or 5 years. 2016. We had 2 million online fantasy sports users in India, and today that number is easily over 100 million. In fact, the number aggregated across all platforms would probably even be 125 to 130 million, which is quite substantial. It is a fourth of smartphone internet users in the country, and it's become quite important as a smartphone internet use case. In fact, some of our recent surveys suggest that online gaming is now the number 5 use case in India after messaging, news reading, watching videos, entertainment videos, and so on. So pretty substantial now. The other thing that that you will see is that it's not so surprising though, because if you look at the BARC data, the sports followership in the country is massive, right? There are 770 million Indian viewers of sports, right? Of course, largely driven by cricket, but 770 million is a staggering number. Of that 770 million, if 1/6 of them or 1/5 of them are also now demonstrating passion around sports through participation in online fantasy gaming, then that is very good for the ecosystem, very healthy for the ecosystem. One of the things that Ramesh and you have been on a few meetings and forums before, I think one of the points that I made at that time also was that India is a very entertainment deficient country. There are if you look at multiplexes, movies, of course, very significant. Daily soap operas, significant. But we don't really have gaming arcades, gaming zones. We don't really have good cinema theaters beyond tier 3 cities. And so, sports fans and in general, people are seeking entertainment avenues that could be engaging to them, right? And with everybody now having good smartphone devices, and that thing is only increasing over time. Digital payments becoming easy, which now allows users to use real money to participate in games online. And in general, users seeking a more fulfilling life and a more engaging sports participation experience. And especially most of the fantasy sports is, even though it's fantasy sports, you rightly said it actually goes along with real sports, right? And so it is actually a means to engage with the real sport, even though it's actually not being played on the mobile phone. So I think a combination of these affordability, devices, internet connectivity, and just a fundamental lack of supply of entertainment avenues is something that has created a very fertile ground for this market to be. Now, if you look at just run rates, and again, the market is growing fast, it's very risky to put a number to it anytime. But according to our latest estimates, this is very close to $1 billion of revenue now in terms of gameplay. Growing very rapidly. Historically, online gaming has itself been growing at a 34% CAGR. So $1 billion of gaming revenue becoming $2.5 billion in the next 2 years, and could easily touch $4 to $5 billion in the next 4 to 5 years. I'll not be surprised. I'll be very surprised if that does not happen. Now, within that, online fantasy sports is a substantial 40% or so. And most of the growth is actually coming from online fantasy sports. So, of the $5 billion, in 5 years, you should expect at least half of that, if not more, to be coming from online fantasy sports. So a $2.5 to $3 billion outcome in terms of market size is not unthinkable, right? It could very well happen. One last thing before I think, in terms of, there are 400 million Indians who are already playing online games, by the way. So, if you juxtapose the 125 to 130 million online fantasy sports number, 30% of the people are already engaging in sports, right? And as the smartphone penetration grows, as the gaming penetration grows, globally gaming penetration is actually much higher. You would see many more fantasy sports gamers, and of course, as the regulatory legitimacy tightens and becomes stronger and more pronounced, you will see more and more markets sort of developing here. So I don't know if there's anything else, Ramesh, you want me to talk about, but I feel pretty optimistic about where things are from an online fantasy sports perspective.
Well, thanks, Madhur. I think these are pretty not only encouraging numbers, but overwhelming numbers. If one were to see on the impact of online fantasy sports, and more importantly, as you said, people. This is one thing that more often gets discussed, that in all other games, and no kind of offense to any other online game, but you're not fixated on that small device, but you use the device to create, and then you are fixated on the game. You might be physically watching it, you might be watching it in a television, you might be following it on your screen somewhere, but it does lead to intensification of fan engagement to a particular sport. And correct. In a way, I think, and this is one more thing I just wanted to add on, are you also seeing, therefore, a contributory kind of effect from fans and enthusiasts actually following the sports closely, resulting in more viewership, more sponsorships, and so on?
So I think overall, from a sponsorship and viewership perspective, see, online fantasy sports is typically being monetized outside advertising. Typically, India has seen gaming monetization through in-app purchases or through advertising, but in India, the monetization is actually through users paying money to participate in contests and so on. So the monetization has been more direct. I do believe that most of the online fantasy sports gaming companies and fans would actually start engaging beyond just paying to play in some of these contests. There could be monetization that will be sought, to engage fans further and engage fans beyond the gameplay, the core gameplay, right? When the particular match is on. So yes, you will see more monetization in terms of ads, merchandise, even phygital fan engagement events and so on. But we've not seen that till now, but I would not be surprised if that happens.
Thanks, Madhur. Moving on to Amit. Amit is the founder of Fantasy Akhada. So Amit, we just discussed how this space has been contributing to the economy and booming and the entire sporting ecosystem, so to speak. Speaking of investments about this sector that it has attracted in recent times, Amit, is the investor outlook towards this particular space, including, gaming as such, but specifically since we are discussing online fantasy sports, is it still positive? Because we are seeing large mushrooming of a lot of formats coming in. And unlike other online games, which may or may not be skill-based, online fantasy sports are dependent on real-life sporting events, and your knowledge of the game and the knowledge of the players and the way you choose your teams and so on, or your players and so on. How do you see this from an investor outlook standpoint? Has it been positive, or has it been booming, or is there a kind of a tapering down? What's your sense here?
Thank you so much, Rameesh, for having me. To give you a sense on the investment outlook, like you mentioned a couple of times in terms of fantasy sports being dependent on real sports, and then being uncertainty around COVID, etc. Leading to real life events not happening as we perceive it. Actually speaking, I would like to dissect the investment piece into 3 to 4 aspects. The first one would be primarily on the market size, and do investors see that there is a lot of potential in this right now or not? If I were to talk about that angle, in fact, I don't need to talk about that angle because Madhur really crafted it really well. What Star Sports tells you about in terms of their IPL viewership, and what the OFS KPMG report that came in recently around how many online fantasy players exist. There is still a lot of headroom. Everyone who's watching sport has the potential to eventually play fantasy sport as well. So if you were to look at that headroom, I think there is immense headroom. And as an investor, while in our conversations they might try to pull us down by saying that there is not much meat left, etc. But I still feel that everyone understands that there is a lot of headroom available as far as sports fans engaging with fantasy sports is concerned. So that is point number one. Also in this whole growing market, another aspect is that because people have started playing fantasy sport, they have started following sport more, which is very intuitive also. So say for example, if you were not following Kabaddi before, but if suppose as in when PKL comes, or when PKL happened last time around, if they started playing fantasy sport for a quick turnaround of money, they started following Kabaddi also more, right? So eventually what happens is the same user starts putting in more money as well. So there are 2 aspects to the market size growing. One is the headroom between the fantasy sports fans and the sports fans that currently exists, and secondly, the existing fantasy sports fans becoming more active on the existing platforms that they play on, because they've started following sports like basketball. Like, you won't believe that people have started following European cricket, they've started following basketball, baseball, etc. So from a market sizing point of view, I think there is all good. There's good news, and that it isn't that kind of a worry. From a dependency on real events not happening, again, barring April last year, when there was a complete shutdown, when there was nothing happening at all across the world, and I think Sunil, who also runs a platform by the name of Playerzpot, would agree that traction does come in as soon as May hit us. May 2020, people would assume that we were still in a lockdown space globally, but that's not the case. Most people who run fantasy sports have started loving this country called Belarus, because they were the first country which started Belarus Football League when the global unlock started, right? So much before the most loved Premier League started in England. So what I was trying to say here is that while of course there's no match to an India cricket event, or there's no match to an IPL event, but there is a lot of traction. Like, people assume that in the month of May this year, it would have been a complete shutdown when IPL got postponed. And people who run fantasy sports can vouch for this fact that was not the case. In fact, the seasonality from this business has started tapering a little bit more than it was a couple of years ago. And if you ask my friends at Dream 11, they would agree that the seasonality has gone down significantly of late, right? So I would feel that right now, dependency on again real life events, I don't see is becoming that big a challenge as far as investments are concerned, because if everything has to stop eventually, then a lot of things will stop, right? So it's not important only for a fantasy sports perspective. So I don't see that also as a challenge. The 2 challenges that I actually see from an investment point of view, one is the regulatory uncertainty, because if an investor wants to come in now, he would want to come in at two places. Either he would go up top with someone who's as big as some of the market leaders are, and the valuation that they command already, but he might find it too expensive to participate there. So he would either come at the bottom of the pill, where he expects that a player would one fine day become big, right? So there I feel that sometimes investors do feel that what if this whole thing was to go south in terms of the regulations, because while Niti Aayog and in fact you guys and Niti Aayog have done a fabulous job of the paper that came out and the draft that came out, there was a state that got banned during that whole period when things were happening, right? So there is natural tendency for an investor to feel like that. Although from a fantasy sports founder point of view, I still feel that it's become much in a space of gray. It's more you are more towards the white than towards the black, is what I perceive it, at least. So that way also, that is one uncertainty and that challenge we do face. Some of our conversations don't go the way we planned because of this uncertainty. And lastly, to close the point on investments, I feel the other challenge, which again someone like Sunil would agree to, is that because the sheer size of some of the players is so huge, there is this uncertainty amongst people to believe that this might not work for some of the other players. Very few mature, I'm not saying that the others are immature, but I'm saying when people understand the industry well, so people who understand the gaming sector well really understand that this is not a one person takes all kind of a situation, because there are things which are so much beyond anyone's control that people end up playing on multiple platforms. It's not a mutually exclusive business, right? It's not like if I bought something from Amazon, I will not buy it from Flipkart. It's not like that. In fact, if I made a team, I might as well put it on multiple platforms, so that yahan nahi jeetunga to kahin aur to jeet hi jaunga, right? So the whole point is that eventually it is not a mutually exclusive business. And some investors and most of the investors do understand it. In fact, like I said, sometimes it's used against some of the players who are coming up right now, that up to there is a market leader, then the second player has also become big, etc. But when you look at the numbers in terms of the growth that we are witnessing, it's not it's a challenge that is posed, but I feel that most of the fantasy players who are doing a good job of handling their customers well end up passing that piece as well. So if I were to broadly summarize in terms of the four pillars of investment challenges that we face, I personally feel that three of them are not as big. In fact, they are they are hurdles which any industry would face, and a founder has to cross them appropriately with business metrics and numbers. What I genuinely believe is a challenge is the regulatory uncertainty, and I feel that with the good work that you have done, and then how Niti Aayog came about things, I personally feel that it is also going down. But I don't see events like IPL, if it postpones by a few months. I don't see. I think people are enough. There are enough and more fans of European cricket in India now than anywhere else, and I feel that I don't think that's a big problem as far as investments are concerned.
Thanks, Amit. And to add on to it, I think one of the things that positive effects that online fantasy sports has actually contributed to is bring the sports enthusiast interest beyond India into
Correct.
other games, into other disciplines, into
Correct.
other countries and formats and so on, which is actually true evolution in a sports enthusiast life. I mean, not being fixated on one sport alone.
Correct.
And that's the positive impact that we see. And of course, this is something we keep telling investors who are investing in the online fantasy space in India, that if you are concerned and if you have concerns around regulatory uncertainty, be assured now there are enough industry associations speaking and fighting for you. It is getting into an organized space as far as advocacy is concerned, and you can count me in this journey as well.
In fact, you very rightly pointed out, because if I were to talk about the women's cricket as well, I personally believe that fantasy sports is a big contributor to women's cricket viewership. It is happening only because of fantasy sports. Otherwise, the kind of traction that it was getting otherwise was not as much. At least that's what I can tell. But yeah, the point absolutely valid.
Thanks, Amit. Moving on to Ankit. Ankit is the business head of FantasyDangal. Ankit, given the tough competition that this sector is facing, and the fact that there are a number of players now mushrooming in this space, what factors are extremely crucial to enhance customer acquisition and also retain customers? Because I mean, there are people, obviously, as mentioned by Amit, people do get into multiple platforms, but I mean, there's a huge kind of scope for growth in the customer acquisition space. So are skill-based games more preferred as a choice of format than other games which may have limited or no skill? And considering that this does involve a bit of skill, I mean, you need to know the game, you need to know the players, you need to know the turf, you need to know their performances before putting your neck in as a sports enthusiast engaging and dabbling in fantasy sports.
Great. Hi. Thank you for having me. And so I would like to answer this in two parts. That firstly, that customer acquisition, as Amit also rightly pointed out, that the scope is massive, and earlier around 100 million, or I think 130 million players are there, and just now Dream 11 posted that 11 crores players are registered on their platform. It's a huge task to so the task, I think, to acquire user is an easy task as compared to retain, because there are multiple platforms have their own advantages and disadvantages, and the user end of the day it matters that where UI and the UX matters, what is the quality of the tech in the app, what kind of app interface we provide to the user, because they have enormous opportunities. If you take over, on an average, if I'm personally talking to some users, that they have 18 to 21 apps as of now downloaded on their mobile, and they are regularly playing on. One day if they have lost on some other application, then they switch it to some other application, and the uninstall rate is massive in this industry. So example, if a user has lost 100 rupees, he immediately switches back to some other website, and he just uninstalls the application. So the acquisition part is quite easy, but the retention part is the trickier part. So where Dangal Games comes into the play, so I'll just go back further that Dangal Games has a portfolio of poker as well, which was started in 4 years back. And we know the customer specific journey because we are into real money gaming from past 4.5 years. Then gradually we launched Rummy as well, which is just doing very well. The Rummy industry is doing very well considering the skill-based gaming. Apart from that, then we launched fantasy. So we understand the consumer psyche, that what is the exact journey from sign up to withdrawal, then deposit, and etc. How the user, what is the exact journey user drops off, what kind of, so there are different users. Some users would be very happy with the technological space, but some users would be totally interested in bonuses or offers. You have to burn actual money to get them or retain on the platform as compared to Dream 11. So unlike Dream 11, we don't have that platform to pull off a 25 crore mega in IPL. So that is a very big kick for a user who is in tier 2 or tier 3 town, and if 10 years back it's like a lottery only. You get a 44 rupees entry ticket, and one day you plan to have I can win 50 lakh rupees from a 44 rupees entry fees. So this kind of pull off is very important in the industry, but certain players can pull it off who have loads of money to burn and etc. But the emerging players and the new players have to get the UI UX, and I personally feel that somehow the debate is that the user base is so massive that you cannot actually communicate with the user, unlike niche games like poker or rummy. But actually it makes a lot of sense that when you personally interact with the user and get that psyche and build that relation with the user to retain him. Personally, it takes a hell lot of time, but I feel personally that a personal knack, and that the user who is residing in tier 2, tier 3 towns, he also feel very welcome when a person calls him and understands his psyche, that why he's not playing, what is the reason that he's not playing on some other website, what is the feature he doesn't like on this website, etc., etc. So that's why now Dangal Games has also launched Dangal Games, which is live, I think 2 days back. It's a multi-gaming platform like MPL and Winzo, and where you will be having casual games, card games. So from onboarding a user, he can play casual games, even a card game, and then fantasy sports. So the combination of e-game, e-sports, casual games, card, etc., can easily acquire a user, and then to make him retain, end of the day, there are many strategies. That firstly, UI UX. So our technology is in-house. You have to get that tech immediately sorted, because if the app is smooth, and earlier you were talking about the digital payment space, the digital payment, the smooth UI and the application, that matters a lot for a user's journey. And end of the day, they prefer that, yeah, if the software, if the technology is right, they prefer to play as compared to the other websites. Now the second part, which comes along, which is the skilled preference over non-skilled gaming. I still feel that skill. So that slang that if in 40 for you can win real money by cutting fruits. No one would have imagined this, that fruit chop is a game that where you can win real money. So end of the day, I think that this kicks into the users of tier 2, tier 3 towns that, yeah, I'm sitting idle. If I can play a carom, if I'm already playing Ludo carom, and if I can play it online and win, I think that it clearly shows the preference over skilled gaming as compared to non-skilled games. Non-skilled games is still the Octo Teen Patti still happens, but the kind of the traction we are seeing in every type of game which involves even a carom, even a pool, chess, etc. So
yeah, so Ankit, I'll just come back to you on this. We have, I think Sidharth, we will pose a question at this stage to Sidharth. This is basically, I mean, Sidharth represents, he's the regional vice president for India and Southeast Asia at Akamai. So, I mean, you've been hearing all the panelists and the various formats which are front-end in nature. And Ankit did mention about customer acquisitions and all of that stuff. This also brings to a fact that there is need for a customer experience, which is critical for all of these platforms to perform and excel. And that seamless feeling, but backed by, for example, I mean, as Akamai is an important backend player for the online gaming sector, whether it is in terms of faster download delivery experiences, because I might, as a customer, may get turned off depending on how the experience is. Media acceleration, analytics. How are you seeing the growth of this particular space from a gaming standpoint that benefits in the backend as far as user experience is concerned, and what are the best practices that this industry should look at, especially around safety, security, and seamless experience, plus of course the fact that customer is safe?
So I was saying we have extensive experience in in the gaming industry, working with the largest gaming companies across the world, and not just the largest gaming companies, but also with the gaming upstarts and game publishers globally. And as an ardent fantasy game player myself, I can tell you that the two things that that bother me as a gamer is, or as a person playing fantasy games, is the experience in those 30 minutes when I have to make changes to my team before the game actually starts, and two, I worry about my personal data and financial information or the credit card information that I've put on the app. So those are the two things for me personally that I worry about, and that is exactly where Akamai comes in and actually helps working with gaming companies to help to protect against. And the way we see it is that the gaming industry, especially in India and globally, has changed dramatically after the pandemic. Right, it has now become the top form of entertainment. Somebody was saying, in the panel, one of our co-panelists was saying that it is among the top 5-6 things that somebody does on a smartphone. I would say it's probably number one in a lot of demographies, right? And just look at the number of gaming companies. In 2010, we had 25 gaming companies. Today we have over 300, or maybe the number is changing by the day. And we've already heard about the industry estimates and where the industry is going to reach in terms of revenue, and the number is staggering. It's a lot of people out there who are interested in the segment. And some of the reasons were covered, but I will stress on two key things that really have caused this increase from our vantage point. One is the mobile internet penetration, right? The internet penetration is so deep here that the app-based gaming have really gained in India, right? And in fact, in terms of just pure game downloads, if you look at 2020 numbers, India, I think, tops the charts there. And hence, a lot of new investment is coming into gaming, and particularly around fantasy and real money gaming, because again, we spoke about why it's so easy and intuitive for people to adopt. And the second important thing is that we are seeing a great adoption of tier 2, tier 3 cities coming into the picture, right? It's just no longer an urban phenomenon, right? It's the tier 2, 3, 4 cities, and and in some senses, the lack of entertainment options there that people are adopting into gaming. And also the other good thing for the industry here for us in India is that we're also seeing traction from outside of India, like in the SAARC and South Asian countries, right? And those markets are picking up, in a big way. So just coming to the second part of what you were saying in terms of the safety and security and the seamless experience part, right? And the point that I highlighted as an end user, the threat landscape is changing, right? I mean, we are seeing that cyber threats are growing, and the challenge for the businesses today is to understand that cybersecurity is a reality. It's here and now, and it has to be a critical part of your business continuity plan. It cannot be an afterthought. And with the pandemic proving to be a catalyst, obviously there are a lot more new people coming on to the platforms and a lot more people adopting gaming. But at the same time, what's happening is this has led for product teams, their product life cycles have actually shrunk because they need to get the product out quickly to the market. And because of this, they're obviously deprioritizing security as a focus area. And the bad guys are watching this, right? So this is something that these malicious actors have been able to exploit. And that is kind of leading to the rise in the number of security attacks in the gaming vertical. And we've seen massive amount of traffic and spikes. As I mentioned, traffic is growing significantly, more new people coming on the platform. But what is happening in parallel is that the attacks are also increasing. And just some statistics that we see from our vantage point, just on the gaming vertical, on our platform, we saw web attacks targeting the entire gaming vertical were up by about 340% year over year, 2020 as compared to 2019. And that's just the web application level attacks. And if you look at credential stuffing, which is trying to steal someone's credentials, and then bot-based attacks, those were also up by 225% year over year. And these are two big kind of attacks that are continuing to grow. Of course, the third aspect of it is the DDoS attacks, which although year over year did not grow much, the attack sizes are still massive and they disrupt communications and the gameplay. And why this is important is that a very essential tenet of any game is trust, right? The gaming companies need to protect the sanctity of the gaming environment and ensure that there is fair play. And gaming apps, particularly fantasy, based game where there's some real money involved, are like mini banks, right? Think about it. We store some personal information data. We also store, credit card data. There's a lot of unscrupulous elements out there who are trying to access, this data, and that makes it the number one threat in my eyes. And right, so that's where,
yeah. So I think the audience has got the perspective on the security. I'll have to cut you down because we are running short on time. Over to Suhail. Suhail, basically, given you have been, both in the offline and online gaming world, and we have seen you all on television and so on. What do you think is the one thing that essentially makes online fantasy sports attractive for sports enthusiasts? And do you believe that it has now heightened interest in all other forms beyond cricket that we are all traditionally fixated on into the likes of Kabaddi and basketball and hockey and so on?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ramesh, and thanks everyone else for your thoughts as well. I'm just going to go back to what Amit had said earlier, right, in terms of the PKL coming around. And I think that's where we at Kabaddi Adda, we've tried to change the landscape a little bit. When you look at the Kabaddi landscape, when you take a back step, there's actually 450 million viewers of the Pro Kabaddi League, right? Compared to your 750 million of the IPL. So you're looking at what is today arguably, and in logic wise, the second biggest sport in the country in terms of viewership. So there's a real shift in paradigm in what's happening, right? I think what we have to understand is Kabaddi has become cool again. While you have you turn up at a stadium, you see your grandparents turn up because they played the game. You see kids turning up because Kabaddi is cool again. And then you've got this middle generation of the parents, which are now the Kabab Mein Haddis, because they know that Kabaddi is now, back in the frontal sort of eye of everyone. So it's become part of culture today. But for me, what we've therefore done is move from being a digital company to being a phygital company, right? We've launched our own asset, which is a K7 that's ongoing at the moment in Haryana. So Amit, to answer your question earlier about whether, PKL is the only tournament people are after. Right now, to give you an example of the numbers, we've got our K7 Kabaddi, which is sort of the NCAA to the NBA. We're trying to create that for PKL here. And we've already hit 700,000 slots sold out on Dream 11 in the first 6 days, which is just the group phase of players I don't even know of. And I've been involved with the Pro Kabaddi League with, from day -1. These are academy boys from across the country. And we've signed up exclusively with fan code for this. So suddenly I think the power of digital comes in, right? We're looking at 23 million viewers, unique viewers, 160 million plus views overall from just this phase of the tournament. And you start to see the power of Naya Bharat, right? And I think that's the big thing that we talk about. We have to understand that with data getting cheaper, there's also disposable income in the hands of a lot of people in tier 2, tier 3 cities that is going to go towards fantasy gaming, right? And I think as a lot of us on this platform understand, that driver of more viewership actually is now coming from fantasy. And it's sort of a catch-22, it's sort of a chicken and egg story where live sport, yes, drives fantasy, but fantasy also is driving more viewership of that live sport, right? And I think that's something that's very important to see. And there is going to be this rise of other sports. I mean, we're starting with Haryana, which is sort of the heartthrob and the hotbed of Kabaddi in the country. We're looking to move to Maharashtra, Telangana, Tamil Nadu as well. But I think there's such massive interest in non-cricket sport as well. I remember talking to Harsh at Dream 11 in 2019. And at that time, they were saying 10% of their revenues was coming from Kabaddi, right? And I mean, these are staggering numbers. Who would have thought? And I would have never thought I'd be a Kabaddi commentator or presenter, 6 or 8 years ago. But here I am today with a Kabaddi startup. So suddenly we're realizing that when you start to drive data through sport, and we're trying to make armchair experts of Kabaddi viewers, right? Just how we know when we see Rohit Sharma make a decision or or Virat Kohli, we're like, guys, you should have bowled Bumrah in the 19th over. We're trying to do that with data for Kabaddi. And by doing so, we're enabling smarter viewers in terms of what they're watching on Kabaddi, but also therefore smarter players of fantasy. And I think that's why for me in this room, I'm the anomaly where I don't own a gaming platform. But what we also will start to see is actually sports creating their own fantasy platforms. We're not far away from launching our own fantasy platform, perhaps, if we're not in partnership with one of the big players. We are right now with Dream 11. But if not, there's enough of an appetite to suggest that with just one sport that's big enough, you've got the market itself. So I don't want to take too much of your time, but that's for me, in a nutshell, how big the potential really is.
Thanks, Suhail. I think we are running short on time. So over to Sunil quickly. Sunil, this is something everybody has spoken about, but what is your view? I mean, how is the uptake for the global sporting events for the Indian sports enthusiasts now, considering that we have always been fixated on India, what's India's performance and so on? Of course, there were people who were pretty much kicked up with what a Brazil does or what a Germany does or what any other country does in football and so on. But what's your take on how is the fan shift happening for global sporting events?
So we are actually running on short on time, so I will keep it short and quick. So firstly, just wanted to highlight, we are talking about IPL in a sense that due to IPL, there has been plethora of other cricketing nations who have started their own franchisee-based competition. And as Amit rightly said, and even pointed by Ankit, most of the sports that are being played across and is basically the franchisee sports that is taken into consideration, be it the BBL of Australia or the CPL of West Indies or the Pakistan Premier League of Pakistan. So what we have seen is the significance which Amit was actually trying to say, that people in a way have started moving from just like a normal cricket-based, nation-based cricketing event. They have started watching other event also, like during the time of pandemic when Belarus was happening actually. And during the Belarus Premier League, we saw people shifting their focus completely from cricket directly to football. And this is the trend that we are seeing. Even if there is no sports happening in the real world scenario, we are still having somewhat the other sports that is coming up in some part of the nation, in some part of the globe. So due to this factor, there is no dearth of sports matches which we cannot cover. At least at this given point of time, we have been running this platform Playerzpot since 6 years now. We have seen we have to make a choice. We have to make a choice which sport we want to cover to what extent. Like Suhail pointed out that 10% of what share that the Kabaddi is having, And to be honest, during the period of Pro Kabaddi League, it shoots as high as 20% of the total contribution that we usually see. So it is just the period, and it is actually a switch between a normal India versus Pakistan match. If there's a series, that series might not give you so much of revenue, but in terms of a series like a CPL, which is a very long period, an IPL or a Big Bash League, those are giving us a higher return, a higher value of return. So summing it out, fantasy cricket, even if there is a COVID, if there is restrictions in real world sports happening, people need entertainment in some sort or the other way. This entertainment, like we have seen in the Premier League, behind the closed door, IPL behind the closed door will happen. It is bound to happen because most of the revenue that is being taken by the advertisers, be the Hotstar or the Stars of the world, are basically the advertisement. So if they have to work, and even the nation franchisee has to work, they will conduct these matches, and we will always be having certain some of the other matches which we can see, and we will be always having matches to cover on the platform. So
Thanks,
overall, it is always a win-win situation for OS online fantasy sport, and we hope that this probably will be increasing gradually.
Thanks. And I think it gives a kind of indicator from what you have said, that all fantasy players need to have a wide array and portfolio, because if one part of the world shuts, the other part of the world plays, and you need to make it available for your sports enthusiasts and fans. Great session. I would draw it to a close, but looks like all of you love Belarus, considering what happened post-lockdown last year. So my takeaway is Belarus. I would like to thank all the speakers for such useful insights, and hope that the audience found this discussion equally interesting. In conclusion, what I would say is online fantasy sports sector, and in fact the gaming sector, has been growing immensely. That's what we get to hear. The investor confidence is still pretty high. Despite multiple court rulings, online fantasy sports still continues to be questioned in some parts of the country. But I think what's important is the fact that there is a need for proper regulatory clarity. There should also be self-regulation. It's a combination that works for this kind of sector. The government can't be micromanaging, but at the same time, we need to have responsible gaming happening in the online fantasy sports space. The sector has a huge visible market potential and is contributing, more importantly, to the real world marketing and the sporting ecosystem. So this re-emphasizes the fact that the industry continues to, and I would not choose the word entertainment, and neither will I say all of you use the term entertainment, because you have finance ministry guys watching and they would say, oh, entertainment 28%, put them in that category. So I prefer to say you're offering services and prefer to sit in the 18% category. It was a wonderful discussion. Thank you for all of you here, and we bring this session to a conclusion.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.